Hello friends, welcome to lesson 8, Cisgender, Transgender and other gender identities. Introduction. The term gender identity refers to the personal sense of an individual's own gender because a person's sex and gender identity do not have to be the same. It is important to know the difference between them. A person's gender is how they identify internally and how they express this externally. People may use clothing, appearances and behaviors to express the gender what they identify with. The objectives of this lesson are, after completion of this lesson, you will be able to elaborate on the concept of gender identity. You will be able to identify diversified gender identities. So, let us begin a brief discussion about gender identity. In 1964, Robert Stoller, American professor of psychiatry, coined the term gender identity. It refers to an individual's perception about their own self as psychologically male or female. For an individual whose gender identity corresponds their biological sex, they are called as cisgender individuals, but for those whose gender identity does not match their biological sex are termed as transgender individuals. For instance, a person born as a female biologically may feel like a male psychologically and thus may also choose to live life like a male, that is dressing, behavior as expected from a man from societal viewpoint. Transsexuals are people who have a gender identity that does not match their biological sex, but they undergo surgical or hormonal treatment to change their sex in order to correspond with their gender identity. It is important to note here that gender identity is different from sexual identity and one should also not confuse it with sexual orientation. Sexual historians have illustrated how medicine took an increasingly dominant role in understanding of sexuality during the 19th century. Alongside homosexuality and a range of other non-normative sexual acts, practices that we now discuss as transgendered were separated from heterosexuality and classified as deviant. The naming of gender diverse practices during the first half of the 19th century produced distinct ways of thinking about gender diverse individuals. Prior to this, cross-dressing and cross-living practices had been understood as fetishistic behaviors and described through the terms sexual inversion or contrary sexual feeling, which were applied to non-heterosexual acts. The nature and development of gender identity have been studied and disputed by psychologists, philosophers and social activists since the late 20th century. Biological essentialists hold that gender identity is fixed at birth by genetic or other biological factors. Social constructivists argued that gender identity or the manner in which gender identity is expressed is socially constructed, that is determined by social and cultural influences. A variation of social constructivism known as performatism holds that gender identity is constituted rather than expressed by continuous performance of gendered behavior, which includes actions and speech. According to the American philosopher Judith Butler, gender is performatively constituted by very expressions that are said to be its results. Basic gender identity, whether innate or constructed, is generally established in children by the age of 3 and is extremely difficult to modify thereafter. In cases where biological sex are ambiguous at birth and errors in sexing were made, it has been almost impossible to re-establish a conventional gender identity later in childhood or adolescence. Furthermore, a secondary gender identity can be developed over the core identity as sex associated behaviors may be adopted later in life. Heterosexual or homosexual also develop later. Gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same. Sexual orientation refers to an individual's enduring physical, romantic or emotional attraction to another person, whereas gender identity refers to one's internal sense of being male, female or something else. Sexual orientation is about the preference of an individual to have other sex or same sex people as partners for love and sex. Homosexuals prefer same sex of gender partners, heterosexuals prefer other sex partners, and bisexuals are accepting of both same sex and other sex partners. Some people also consider themselves to be gender fluid as they do not agree with the binary concept of gender, that is males and females. Certain people call themselves as a gender hybrid, a combination of male and female. Intersex people are those who are born with ambiguous genitalia. The transgender people may be straight, lesbian, gay, bisexual or asexual, just as non-transgender people may be. Some recent research has shown that a change or a new exploration period in partner attraction may occur during the process of transition. However, transgender people usually remain as attached to loved ones after transition as they were before transition. Transgender people usually label their sexual orientation using their gender as a reference. For example, a transgender woman or a person who is assigned male at birth and transitions to female who is attracted to other women would be identified as a lesbian or gay woman. Likewise, a transgender man or a person who is assigned female at birth and transitions to male who is attracted to other men would be identified as a gay man. Friends, let us now briefly discuss about types of gender identities. Let us list down the different types of gender identities for our preliminary understanding, though the list is not exhaustive. When we talk about affirmed gender, it is the gender by which one wishes to be known. Agender is a person who does not identify with any gender identity. Androgynous is someone who identifies or presents as neither distinguishably masculine or feminine. Asexual is people who do not experience sexual attraction or do not have a desire for sex. Bisexual is a person who is emotionally, romantically or sexually attracted to more than one sex, gender or gender identity. Cisgender, in this the gender identity aligns with the sex assigned to them at birth. Demisexual, sexual attraction only to people with whom they have an emotional bond, often considered to be on the asexual spectrum. Gender expansive is an umbrella term used for individuals who broaden their own culture's commonly held definitions of gender, including expectations for its expression, identities, roles or other perceived gender norms. Those who are gender expansive include people who are transgender and people whose gender broadens the surrounding society's notion of what gender is. Gender fluid. It does not identify with a single fixed gender. Identification and presentation may shift whether within or outside of the male or female. Gender queer. Gender expressions or identity falls outside dominant social norms of their assigned sex, identified as having aspects of both male and female identities or neither. Gender dysphoria. It involves a conflict between a person's physical or assigned gender and the gender with which they identify. Gender outlaw. A person who identifies as a gender outlaw refuses to allow society's definition of male or female to define them. Gender non-conforming is a person whose gender expression does not align with cultural expectations associated with their sex assigned at birth. Non-binary is a person whose gender identity does not fall within the gender binary of male or female. Trans man, a person whose sex assigned at birth was female but whose gender identity is male. Trans woman, a person whose sex assigned at birth was male but whose gender identity is a female. Intersex, it refers to a variety of biological conditions in which a person is born with the reproductive or hormone levels that do not fit the typical definition of male or female. LGBTQ, an acronym for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer. Let us now try to understand who is a cisgender. A cisgender person identifies with the sex that they were assigned at birth. For example, a cisgender woman is someone who still identifies with the sex that is female, that is sex assigned at birth. This does not mean that people who are cisgender have to experience attraction toward people of different gender to themselves. Although people who are cisgender may conform to societal expectations of gender norms and expressions, they can be gender non-conforming while still identifying with the sex a doctor assigned them at birth. Friends, now let us discuss about transgender. The term transgender denotes a range of gender experiences, subjectivities and presentations that fall across, between or beyond categories of man and woman. Transgender includes gender identities that have more traditionally been described as transsexual and a diversity of genders. Many identities fall under the transgender umbrella. The term transsexual refers to people whose gender identity is different from their assigned sex. Often, transsexual people alter or wish to alter their bodies through hormones, surgery and other means to make their bodies as congruent as possible with their gender identities. This process of transition through medical intervention is often referred to as sex or gender reassignment, but more recently is also referred to as gender affirmation. People who were assigned female but identify and live as male and alter or wish to alter their bodies through medical intervention to more closely resemble their gender identity are known as transsexual men or trans men, also known as female to male or FTM. Conversely, people who were assigned male but identify and live as female and alter or wish to alter their bodies through medical intervention to more closely resemble their gender identity are known as transsexual women or trans women, also known as male to female or MTF. Some individuals who transition from one gender to another prefer to be referred to as a man or a woman rather than as transgender. Transgender people experience their transgender identity in variety of ways and may become aware of their transgender identity at any age. Some can trace their transgender identities and feelings back to their earliest memories. They may have vague feelings of not fitting in with people of their assigned sex or specific wishes to be something other than their assigned sex. Others become aware of their transgender identities or begin to explore and experience gender non-conforming attitudes and behaviors during adolescence or much later in life. Some embrace their transgender feelings while others struggle with feelings of shame or confusion. Those who transition later in life may have struggled to fit in adequately as their assigned sex, only to later face dissatisfaction with their lives. Some transgender people, transsexuals in particular, experience intense dissatisfaction with their sex assigned at birth, physical sex characteristics or gender role associated with that sex. These individuals often seek gender affirming treatments. Transgender people may also have additional identities that may affect the types of discrimination they experience. Groups with such additional identities include transgender people of racial, ethnic or religious minority backgrounds, transgender people of lower socioeconomic statuses, people with disabilities, youth, elderly and others. Experiencing discrimination may cause significant psychological stress, often leaving transgender individuals to wonder whether they were discriminated against because of their gender identity or gender expression, another socio-cultural identity or some combination of all of these. According to the study, while discrimination is pervasive for the majority of transgender people, the intersection of anti-transgender bias and persistent structural racism is especially severe. People of color in general fare worse than white transgender people, with African American transgender individuals faring far worse than all other transgender populations examined. Many transgender people are the targets of hate crimes. They are also the victims of subtle discrimination, which includes everything from glances or glares of disapproval or discomfort to invasive questions about their body parts. Friends, let us now discuss the difference between transgender and intersex. Intersex people have reproductive anatomy or genes that don't fit typical definitions of male or female, which is often discovered at birth. Being transgender, meanwhile, has to do with one's internal knowledge of one's gender identity. A transgender person is usually born with a body and genes that match a typical male or female, but they know their gender identity to be different. Some people think that determining who is male or female at birth is a simple matter of checking the baby's external anatomy, but there's actually a lot more to it. Every year, according to an estimate, 1 in 2000 babies are born with a set of characteristics that can't easily be classified as male or female. People whose bodies fall in the vast continuum between male and female are often known as intersex people. There are many different types of intersex conditions. For example, some people are born with XY chromosomes but have female genitals and secondary sex characteristics. Others might have excess chromosomes but no uterus, or might have external anatomy that doesn't appear clearly male or female. While it's possible to be both transgender and intersex, most transgender people are not intersex and most intersex people are not transgender. For example, many intersex people with XY, which is a typically male chromosomes but typically female anatomy, are declared female at birth, are raised as girls and identify as girls. In fact, many of these girls and their families never even become aware that their chromosomes are different than expected until much later in life. However, some intersex people come to realize that the gender that they were raised as doesn't fit their internal sense of who they are and may make changes to their appearance or social roles similar to what many transgender people undergo to start living as the gender that better matches who they are. There are also differences between transgender and gender non-conforming. Let us try to understand that. Being gender non-conforming means not conforming to gender stereotypes. For example, someone's clothes, hairstyle, speech patterns or hobbies might be considered more feminine or masculine than what's stereotypically associated with their gender. Gender non-conforming people may or may not be transgender. For example, some women who were raised and identify as women present themselves in ways that might be considered masculine, like by having short hair or wearing stereotypically masculine clothes. You all must have heard the term tomboy, which refers to a girls who are gender non-conforming, which often means they play rough sports, hang out with boys and dress in more masculine clothing. Similarly, transgender people may be gender non-conforming or they might conform to gender stereotypes for the gender they live and identify as. According to National Center for Transgender Equality based in US, there are a number of theories about why transgender people exist, although there is not yet scientific consensus. Looking across the cultures, we find that people have had a wide range of beliefs about gender. Some cultures look at people and see many genders while others see two. Some cultures have created specific ways for people to live in roles that are different from that assigned to them at birth. In addition, different cultures also vary in their definitions of masculine and feminine. Whether we view someone as transgender also depends on the cultural lenses we are looking through as well as how people identify themselves. Biologists tell us that sex is a complicated matter. A person has XX chromosome is generally considered female, while a person with XY chromosome is generally considered male. However, there are also people who have XXY, XYY and other variations of chromosomes. These genetic differences may or may not be visibly apparent or known to the person. Some people are born with XY chromosomes but are unable to respond to testosterone and therefore develop bodies with a vagina and breast rather than a penis and testis. A variation in gender may just be part of the natural order and there are more varieties than we generally realize. People with biological differences in gender may be considered intersex. They may or may not identify as transgender. There are medical theories about why people are transgender. Some speculate that fluctuations or imbalances in hormones or the use of certain medications during pregnancy may cause intersex or transgender conditions. Other research indicates that there are links between transgender identity and brain structure. Some people believe that psychological factors are the reason for existence of transgender people. It is clear that there are people who are aware that they are transgender from their earliest memories. Many trans people feel that their gender identity is an innate part of them, an integral part of who they were born to be. Understanding transgender. Then there are people who feel that everyone has a right to choose whatever gender presentation feels best to that individual. People should have the freedom to express themselves in whatever way is right for them. Sex and gender are complex issues. A huge variety of factors are at work in making each individual the person that they are, and there is no one reason that causes people to be transgender. Trans people are part of the variety that makes up the human community. Friends, let us now discuss about transgender identities in India. The country-wide census conducted in 2011 had three options to declare a person's sex: male, female and other. This was India's first attempt at collecting data on people with non-binary gender identities. Despite issues of exclusion and accuracy, the census provided an estimate of India's transgender population close to 4,87,803. The transgender community in India includes Hijdas, eunuchs, Kotis, Aravanis, Jogappas, Shiv Shaktis, etc., who have been a part of Indian society for centuries. The Vedic and Puranic literatures also mention about Tritiya Prakriti, meaning the third gender, and Napunsaka, meaning someone with the loss of procreative ability. The word hijra used in Indian language appears to be derived from the Persian word his, that is someone who is effeminate and or ineffective or incompetent. Another commonly used word is skinner. Though most of the eunuchs seen today are begging at traffic signals or during weddings, they were respected a lot during the Mughal rule during medieval period. The word eunuch is derived from the Greek word eunuchos, which literally means bedchamber attendant. Hence, they were put in the charge of the harams due to their emasculation. During the British rule, they were denied civil rights and were considered a separate caste or a tribe who did kidnapping and castration of children and danced and dressed like women. The LGBTQ group is referred to as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and queer community, which includes those with gender dysphoria and different sexual orientations. The Honorable Supreme Court of India passed a unique judgment in April 2014 stating one's sexual orientation as the integral part of personality, dignity and freedom, and identified transgender as third gender. In the National Legal Services Authority versus Union of India case, the apex court provided the transgender, that is hijras and eunuchs, a legal identity along with other directions. Post NLSA judgment, various courts have passed favorable orders for the transgender community. The transgender in India is possibly the most well known and popular third type of sex in the modern world. The Honorable Supreme Court declared transgender as a third gender, and third genders in India have emerged as a strong faction in the LGBT rights. In the contemporary time, the government of India introduced several welfare policies and schemes such as census, documentation, issuing of the citizenship ID cards, issuing passports, socio-economic development and constitutional safeguards for the transgender people. The Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act popularly known as NREGA, is a major initiative during the 11th five-year plan period which brought employment opportunities for the transgender people. The Ministry of Housing and Urban Poverty Alleviation is the National Urban Livelihoods Mission and Healthcare Facilities. The social, economic, political transformation, housing, legal measures, police reforms, legal and constitutional safeguards are also provided to prevent human rights violation of the transgender community, and institutional mechanisms to address specific concerns of the transgender people. Friends, let us now summarize this lesson. There are diversified gender identities. Gender identity and sexual orientation are not the same. Transgender persons have been part of Indian society for centuries. There was historical evidence of recognition of third sex or persons not conforming to male or female gender in near the beginning writings of ancient India. There is need to eradicate the stigma, discrimination and human rights violation for the betterment of the transgender community. If all these are brought in their day-to-day life, it would enlarge the growth of transgender community in India. We will further explore about transgender lives and laws in our next lesson. Thank you very much.